On Tuesdays, the building across from Daniel's office flickered like a lake of Windows lawyers in navy suits moving behind glass as if they were underwater. He had always loved the view for its steadiness. Steadiness was a currency in a city that measured people in quarters and headlines. Steadiness was also what Olivia used to gift him without trying. The way she laid her keys on the dish by the door, the way she leaned her shoulder into his when they watched late-night reruns with takeout cartons orphaned on the coffee table. By November, steadiness had become a choreography. The keys missed the dish. Her shoulders stayed taut, even when she laughed. He began to notice scents the way a sommelier notices oak on the finish. Olivia had worn a clean, citrus-forward perfume since law school. Now and then a rounder, more expensive sweetness arrived with her. He said nothing the first time. He said nothing the second. On the third, he pressed his face briefly to the scarf she left on the back of the dining chair, then felt ashamed not for the suspicion, but for the intimacy of investigation. Brooklyn moved through its rituals outside their brownstone. Dogs walked people. A school bus coughed to a stop. Bodega flowers shouldered into the sidewalk air, cheap and bright. Daniel took the F into Manhattan with a thermos coffee and a sketchbook. He was a senior product designer at a fintech startup that put soft gradients on hard money, where days were scented with whiteboard markers and consensus. User journeys, his manager liked to say, as if mapping consumer behavior were a pilgrimage. He drew quiet flows for anxious people. Late fees waived, a nudge to save, a softer red for insufficient funds. Olivia texted at 5:48 p.m., running late. Trial prep exploded. Don't wait up. He stared at the words. They didn't ring false. They didn't ring anything. He typed, "Want me to keep dinner warm?" Then erased it. He typed, "Proud of you," and sent it, a small, sincere coin tossed into a well. At 7:12, he took their wedding photo down from the hallway because the frame had skewed, and because the glass reflected him as a man who adjusted frames rather than pictures. The photo was 5 years old. City Hall, a silk jumpsuit instead of a gown, Olivia's grin the size of a brave mistake. He remembered the judge saying, "May you never be bored." It had sounded like a blessing. Now it sounded like an omen. The first artifact landed the following week, ordinary as lint, a printed receipt curled at the bottom of her camel coat. He didn't look for it. It found him, clung to the lining until it fell on the floor. The Mercer, room service, a grilled octopus, a Barolo by the glass. The date aligned with a Thursday she had worked past midnight. He picked up the slip between two fingers like a specimen, then put it back where he found it. He told himself that he could carry suspicion without letting it spill. At his desk, the tools of belief and doubt felt the same. Tabs fail, searches, maps. He typed the Mercer, as if researching an icon of industrial design, which he had done a lifetime ago in grad school, iron columns, mosaic floors, a bar that photographed beautifully. He zoomed in on the map, then out, then closed the browser as if shame were a pop-up he could X out. That evening he asked Olivia about her day. She answered in paragraphs. Her voice threaded apology into triumph the way lawyers thread with respect before a blow. The second artifact was digital. In their shared password manager, where they kept the unromantic backbone of a household utilities, streaming services, bike share, Daniel noticed a new entry. The Sterling Laundry. Pick up and drop off midtown, far from their neighborhood. He did not open it. He did not need to. Geography is a kind of confession. He began to catalog kindness like a man counting batteries before a storm. He cooked her grandmother's lemon chicken from memory because the card had been lost in a move. He replaced a light bulb in the stairwell that had needed replacing all autumn. He bought her a wool hat in the color she always considered too loud for herself. He watched the ways she received these offerings, grateful, distracted, dutiful, tender, in small bursts that evaporated quickly, like steam. At 9:23 p.m., on a rain-glossed Tuesday, he walked the long way home, through Soho where storefront glass held warm rooms like candles hold flame. He passed the Mercer without intending to pass the Mercer. He stood across the street under scaffolding, anonymous in the blur of umbrellas. Through the revolving door came people he did not know, and a life that was not his. He didn't see Olivia. He didn't need to. Proximity is its own weather system. He went home and sat at the kitchen table. The apartment carried their history with the indifferent fidelity of plaster, pencil ticks on the pantry door from their niece's visits, the dent in the baseboard from when they moved the sofa and bickered about angles but not about love. He opened his laptop and stared at a blank message thread. Words lined up at the edge of him like swimmers at the lip of the pool. He typed, "I'm outside your office with coffee, come down." He watched the 3 dots appear and vanish. She wrote, "In the middle of something. Rain check?" The building where she worked was dark by 8:30 most nights. The public calendar for the firm read closed for maintenance from 6 p.m. This he knew, because he had looked, telling himself it was to plan a surprise late-night pickup once, a foolish, tender lie he had auditioned and dismissed. He deleted his text. He closed the laptop. He opened it again. There's a point in every design review where the problem becomes a sentence. He had taught junior designers to find it, to cut out all the flourishes and write one line that made the room still. He pictured Olivia reading on a sidewalk, or in a lobby, or naked in a stranger's. Lamplight, phone face lit like confession. He typed the line that would end the question and begin the truth. "The Mercer just called about your necklace. Should I have them hold it under your maiden name or his?" He did not send it. Not yet. He let the words live on the screen while rain threaded the fire escape and a siren stitched uptown to downtown. He imagined the necklace, the one she only wore when she needed bravery. A small gold bar engraved with Reed, her name before it braided with his. If the hotel called anyone, it would be because she left it on a nightstand she had no right to. He stood and poured water he didn't want. He thought about what mercy looked like here, whether mercy was silence or precision. He thought about the judge at City Hall and the unfashionable wish to be bored. He thought about the stories we tell to stay the people we prefer to be. At 10:07, the city leaned into its own pulse. Daniel sat again and pressed send. The message left, small and simple, and impossible to unsend. He set the phone face down without turning off the sound. It rang almost immediately. "Dan," Olivia said, and her voice carried that rare, unbearable honesty that appears when a bluff is called and the room has no air left. "Can you come home? I need to tell you everything." On the walk back from the train, he watched himself in the blacked-out shop windows. A man who loved a woman. A man about to hear her say she loved someone else. A man who would try to draw a map through a city without street names. He did not rehearse forgiveness. He rehearsed listening. It felt like holding a glass without knowing whether he would be asked to fill it or to drop it. At their door, the key found the dish without looking. The habit was still there. The home was still theirs. Olivia stood in the living room with her coat on, like a traveler who had returned only to pack correctly this time. She lifted her hands and then let them fall. "I lied," she said, and the lie didn't belong to any single night. "I'm sorry." Daniel looked at the window and saw 2 reflections, his and hers, braided by a city that did not care who they were. Behind them, the rain turned the streetlights into halos with no saints underneath. He opened his mouth, not to accuse and not to absolve, but to place a marker on the map where truth began. "Start with the necklace," he said softly. "Then we'll get to the rest." They chose the kitchen because it was the room with the least history. The bedroom had 1,000 soft fingerprints on its walls. The couch had a sun-faded rectangle where a blanket used to live. The kitchen was steel and tile, a place for heat transformed into nourishment, a place where things boiled and then calmed. Olivia wrapped both hands around a glass of water she hadn't sipped. Daniel sat opposite, elbows off the table as if in court. The refrigerator hummed at a domestic register that felt indecent. "It wasn't planned," she started, and winced at the poverty of the phrase. "That sounds like every bad movie, but it wasn't. It was increments." He waited. He had brought his listening like a tool bag. "At the firm," she said, eyes unfixed, "there's this elevator math. Who gets off at 22 for litigation? Who keeps rising to 30 for M&A? The higher the floor, the fewer the jokes. Ethan's floor is 33. She swallowed. "My mentor left for in-house at a tech company in June, and the cases piled up like crates in a warehouse. Ethan started inviting me to prep sessions, not dates, just the kind of brutal workshops where you learn how to say objection without blinking. He was kind in the way people are when they think kindness is rare. He would remember that I took my coffee black on days we filed motions and with milk on days we had clients." She smiled once, a faint, self-indicting curve. "It's absurd, what begins to feel like romance when you're exhausted." Daniel's eyes flicked to the window, to the soft braid of light across the sink. "Where did it start?" he asked, not unkindly. "The first line you crossed." "After hours. In a conference room," Olivia said. "The one with the view of the courthouse. He touched my wrist to stop me from highlighting something in a brief the way senior attorneys do, a gesture of direction. Except it stayed a beat too long. I didn't move my hand away. I told myself I was being practical, that if he liked me, he'd put me on better cases. Everyone says not to be naive about politics." She glanced up, expecting to find blame. Daniel's face was even, a shoreline that absorbed weather without eroding. "The first time it was the Sterling laundry," she continued, a small, embarrassed exhale. "We had a dinner with a client, and I spilled a reduction sauce on my blouse. He sent it out to be cleaned because the firm has an account it's stupid, but it felt like being taken care of in a world where care is rationed. Later, when he said he could help with performance reviews, I pretended not to understand the grammar of the offer. The phone on the counter buzzed, an algorithmic reminder from a meditation app she hadn't opened in months. "Breathe, Olivia," she almost laughed. "Say his name," Daniel said softly. "Ethan Hale," she answered. 42, divorced. He runs on the West Side Highway at dawn and believes this makes him difficult to corrupt." She rubbed her thumb across the condensation on the glass and left a clear oval. "I told myself it was mentorship with weather. Then the weather moved indoors." "How long?" Daniel asked. 3 months, she said. 4, if you count the messages that were mostly jokes with small knives tucked inside. He didn't flinch at the duration. Time is an imprecise instrument in pain. A day can be a wound, a season a bandage. "Why the Mercer?" he asked. "Because it's a myth with room service," she said, and the honesty startled them both. "Because no one from the firm would risk being seen at the bars we actually like. Because I wanted the illusion of a decision, a door you pass through that says this was chosen, not drifted. The first time, I took the subway home and cried on the Manhattan Bridge. Not because I regretted it yet, but because I had found the seam of myself that unstitched so easily. There was a calendar magnet on the fridge from a vet they no longer used, their old neighbor's terrier smiling in perpetuity. Daniel thought, obscurely, of loyalty as a set of teeth that could not hold. "What did you tell yourself about me?" he asked, and the question was a scalpel. "That you were steady," she said. "That steadiness would absorb what the world did to me. That you didn't need me to be soft because you were good at being kind to yourself, which is a lie I told to save me from giving you what you deserved." She reached, stopped, left her hand in the air, unclaimed. "It wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me thinking I had no edges left that were mine." The city pressed another siren against the glass, a far sound that made the room feel smaller. Daniel spoke carefully, like someone testing ice. "Did you love him?" "No," she said immediately, then slower. "I loved the permission. I loved being looked at by someone who wasn't already holding the rest of me. I loved the idea that I could step out of my life like a dress and then step back in unchanged. But that idea is a fraud. You always bring the zipper marks." She reached into her tote, pulled out her necklace, the gold bar that had featured in the message, and placed it on the tablecloth as if laying down a weapon. "The hotel didn't call. I left this there on purpose, to make it feel precious. I went back the next day alone and retrieved it from Lost and Found like some penitent. That's when I realized I was fabricating rituals to sanctify what was, at its core, cowardice." Daniel touched the chain with one finger, and the metal rung against the wood in a sound too bright for the moment. "What do you need from me right now?" he asked. "Not forgiveness, not even choice. Need. To be allowed to tell the whole thing without you trying to rescue me from it," she said. "I don't want the mercy that edits. I want the punishment of accuracy." He nodded once. Accuracy was a language he spoke. She inhaled. The second time was worse because it was easier. "I learned the angle of the lobby camera and how to keep my face at an unremarkable tilt. I learned to mute your texts when I was upstairs, and then to reply on the sidewalk so I could borrow the chill of the evening as an alibi. I lied poorly, Dan, not because I'm bad at lying, but because a part of me wanted to be discovered. That part wrote sloppy emails and let receipts curl in pockets." She bit her lip until the blood came bright. "When your message came tonight, I felt two things at once, shame and relief in equal parts, like two liquids that don't mix." He closed his eyes, and in the theater darkness behind his lids, he saw their first apartment, a fifth-floor walk-up where the landlord painted the corners and not the walls. He saw Olivia at 25, standing on a chair to string lights like a map of good intentions. He opened his eyes to the woman at the table, more herself and less decorated. "Will you end it?" he asked. "I already did," she said. "At least the part with rooms and doors. This afternoon. I called and said the words you say when you finally mean them. He tried to invoice me for wisdom. I hung up." Daniel half smiled at that, brief as a match struck in wind. "And the firm. I'll request a transfer to a different team, and if they refuse, I'll leave," she said. "I'm not asking you to applaud. I'm telling you the steps I can control." He stared at the refrigerator magnet, then at the calendar behind it, dinner with friends Friday, his brother's kids' recital Saturday, a dentist appointment he'd rescheduled twice. The quiet violence of ordinary plans. "I think we separate," he said. "Not as a verdict, as a container. We can try to speak in a way that doesn't turn the other person into a theory." Olivia nodded, tears gathering but obedient at the lower lid. "I'll go to Nora's for a while," she said. "She has a pullout. She will ask 100 questions, and I will answer 5. He stood to get a trash bag, then stopped, stilling his impulse to clean something as a substitute for deciding. "We'll make a list," he said. "Rent, utilities, the dog we don't have, holidays, the people who will take sides, and the people who will surprise us." He looked at her. Finally, the full look that refuses to protect either party with blur. "And we'll tell our parents ourselves. I won't be a piece of news someone drinks over." She exhaled as if he had offered her a chair in a room with no furniture. "Thank you," she said, a phrase that contained no triumph. They moved through small tasks as if performing a liturgy. She packed a week into a duffel. He folded 2 spare towels, still warm from the dryer. They did not touch, not because touch was forbidden, but because it was briefly sacred and would have to mean too much. At the door, Olivia paused. "Do you want me to leave the keys?" "No," he said. "Keep them. We aren't erasing. We're underlining." She almost smiled. "You always liked a good margin." He stood in the doorway after she left, the hallway light pooling at his feet. Across the street, a neighbor's television flickered a game show where strangers guessed the price of things. He went back to the kitchen, picked up the necklace, and placed it in the small ceramic dish beside the keys. The dish looked suddenly like an altar to 2 versions of a life. He poured the water she hadn't drunk into the sink and watched it run clear, then thin, then gone. The apartment seemed to inhale without them, the way rooms do when the performance stops. He set an alarm for the morning, opened the meditation app he downloaded months ago, and let a kind voice tell him to notice his breathing as if it were a new idea. In the dark, he composed a message to his brother and deleted it. He composed another to Nora and kept it. He wrote one last line to Olivia, a coda rather than a plea. "Thank you for the accuracy. Tomorrow, let's start a ledger." He turned the phone face down, lay on his side of the bed like a citizen abiding by a border, and let the city be noisy enough to drown a memory without silencing it. Morning arrived like a truce neither of them had signed. The apartment was full of the quiet left behind by someone who had packed carefully. No slammed drawers, no forgotten toothbrush. The air had that neutral scent of detergent and loss. Daniel woke to sunlight bisecting the bed, one half warm, one half untouched, and the sound of a text arriving at precisely 7:02 a.m. "Olivia, made it to Nora's. There's coffee. Take it easy today." He read it twice, not because of its content, but because of its tone. It was domestic, the kind you send after a grocery run, not an exile. The irony settled on him like dust. He showered without music, ate without appetite, and dressed as if for a deposition with himself. Then he opened his laptop and created a spreadsheet titled The Ledger. It was meant to track bills and practicalities, the remains of a shared life. But as columns multiplied, it began to hold something else. The accounting of harm, of silence, of how 2 good people could drift into separate weather systems without noticing when it started to rain. He listed rent, utilities, streaming services, family calls, trust, broken words unsaid. The last 2 weren't meant to be there, but he left them. By noon, he found himself walking to the cafe where Olivia had worked part-time during law school. They hadn't been there in years, but he wanted a place that still remembered them together. The barista recognized him faintly. "Haven't seen you guys in forever," she said, ringing up his order. He smiled the way one does when nostalgia is mistaken for continuity. He sat by the window with his coffee, watching the city pulse. People hurried into lives still intact, each carrying invisible negotiations. The hum of laptops, the hiss of milk frothing it, was all absurdly normal. He opened his phone to a blank email draft titled Olivia, joint statement. He typed, "We'll tell them it was mutual, that we grew apart but respect each other deeply, that this decision comes from love, not anger." He paused, deleted love, replaced it with clarity. That afternoon, he met his brother Mark at a bar that pretended to be a library, wood panels, low light, books no one read. Mark ordered bourbon for both of them before Daniel sat down. "So," Mark said, "it's true." Daniel nodded. "She told you?" She confessed. Voluntarily? With precision, Daniel said, and Mark let out a low whistle. Mark had always been the family's blunt instrument. You're handling this too calmly, he said. I'd have torched her phone records by now. That's the problem, Daniel said. Everyone thinks anger is proof of being alive. But I think accuracy is harder. Jesus, Mark muttered. You're still defending her. I'm not, Daniel said, though he wasn't sure. I'm defending the fact that she's not a villain. She's just a person who miscalculated the cost. Mark leaned back. You gonna forgive her? Daniel looked at the glass between his hands. Eventually. Maybe not for her sake. For mine. Later, walking home through early winter light, Daniel saw couples wrapped in scarves, their conversations private but peaceful. He tried to imagine being one of them again. He couldn't yet. That night, he called Olivia. It wasn't scheduled. He just needed her voice to make the ledger less abstract. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, I didn't expect... I know, I'm not calling to rehash, just logistics. Okay, she said, though her voice had that break that belongs to someone holding their breath. They talked about rent, utilities, the dog they didn't have. But as always, practicality began to blur into tenderness. I keep forgetting how quiet it is here, she said. Nora's out, and the walls are thin enough to hear other people's dinners. You hate quiet, he said. Yeah, she laughed faintly. I miss the way our dishwasher hums. Isn't that ridiculous? Not really, he said. It's the soundtrack of a life that worked until it didn't. There was a long silence. Then Olivia said softly, Daniel, I'm going to start therapy. He blinked. That's good. It's overdue. I need to understand why I kept choosing admiration over intimacy. He wanted to say me too, but instead said, That's a good sentence. She exhaled, the sound raw through the phone. I don't expect us to fix this. I just don't want the story to end with cruelty. It won't, he said, but it'll have consequences. I know. Before hanging up, she added quietly, You were the one person I could always tell the truth to. I'm sorry I saved the worst truth for last. When the line went dead, Daniel stayed sitting on the floor beside the couch. The ledger on his laptop glowed from the table, a document that had started as financial and turned human. He opened it again, added 2 new rows. Therapy, $180 session. Chance of peace, variable. Then, almost without thinking, he started a second tab titled, What Was True. He listed, she loved the sound of rain. She never forgot birthdays. She believed in second chances, even for strangers. She lied. She told the truth after. He stared at the list until the words blurred. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to remembering. By midnight, he was at the window, city lights like static across glass. Somewhere uptown, Olivia might be doing the same 2 silhouettes in separate apartments, staring at the same weather, breathing through the same ache. He whispered into the stillness, as if to no one, This is how love leaves it doesn't slam. It dissolves. And then, before sleep, he wrote a final entry into his ledger. Both responsible, both surviving. Nora's apartment was an old pre-war walk-up that smelled faintly of lavender detergent and intellectual fatigue. Olivia had once loved it here during law school, a place where ambition met vulnerability over cheap wine and feminist manifestos. But now the same walls made her skin itch. There were too many reminders of who she used to be before the ring, before the job, before the hunger to be seen became something corrosive. She stood by the window, hair pulled into an unpracticed bun, watching a garbage truck reverse into the alley. The beep, beep, beep sounded like a metronome for guilt. Nora was at work, mercifully. The city outside pulsed with caffeine and purpose. Olivia felt none of it. She was 31, technically successful, emotionally bankrupt, and suddenly aware that every decision of the past 5 years had been about optimization, not of joy, but of image. The first few days after moving out had passed in a blur of survival. She texted Daniel only for necessities, the electricity bill, the mail. But at night, she drafted messages she never sent. Apologies that sounded rehearsed, explanations that collapsed under their own weight. What words could justify betrayal? And what apology mattered when the wound wasn't visible, only pulsing somewhere behind the ribs? Her phone buzzed an unknown number. For a second, her breath hitched, foolishly hoping it was Daniel from a new line. But it was Ethan. "Can we talk?" "Just once, cleanly. I owe you that." She stared at the screen. A part of her wanted to delete it unread. Another part, the reckless, curious lawyer in her, wanted cross-examination. Closure was a dangerous myth, but so was silence. She typed back. 30 minutes. Bryant Park. Noon. Public. When she arrived, Ethan was already there, in his tailored coat and the same quiet confidence that had once felt like gravity. The winter sun hit the bronze lion statues, making them gleam like judgment. He smiled, that practiced blend of remorse and control. "Olivia," he began, voice low, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I shouldn't have," she replied. They sat, an arm's length apart, on the cold metal bench. Between them, the city moved horns, laughter, wind cutting through layers of pretense. "I didn't call to drag you back," he said. "Just to tell you I didn't mean to destroy anything." She laughed quietly, bitterly. "That's the problem, Ethan. People never mean to. They just do it because it's convenient." He flinched. "It wasn't just convenience. You were real to me. We were both drowning." "No," she said, eyes fixed on the pavement. "You wanted someone to reflect your power back to you, and I wanted to disappear inside someone else's certainty. We made a mirror, not a home." He nodded, shame softening his jawline. "You think you'll go back to him?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know I'll have to face the version of myself who thought you were an answer." He tried to reach for her hand. She drew back. "Don't. Not even for goodbye." Ethan exhaled, defeated. "You always had the cleanest cuts." She stood, her coat swinging lightly against her knees. "No, Ethan. I just finally learned where to stop bleeding." When she left the park, the city felt different, no lighter, but clearer. She walked 10 blocks without purpose, her mind replaying Daniel's voice. "I think we separate, as a container." The phrasing had sounded clinical then, but now it felt merciful. He hadn't slammed a door. He'd built a room for truth to survive in. That evening, she found herself writing. Not briefs or filings, but a journal entry. She hadn't kept one since college. The page absorbed her confession with indifference. Nov 19. "I used to think infidelity was an act. Now I see it's a slow erosion. You don't wake up and decide to betray someone, you just stop telling them the small truths until silence feels safer than honesty. Daniel loved me without decoration. I mistook that for boredom. I wanted fireworks, not realizing they burn out faster than candlelight." She closed the notebook and let the sentence echo in her head. At almost midnight, unable to sleep, she called Daniel. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "Are you okay?" he asked immediately, voice calm but tired. "I saw him today," she said, blunt. "Ethan, I needed to close it." He didn't interrupt. "I told him it's over. Not just with him, with that part of me. I thought you should know." "Thank you," Daniel said after a long pause. "That means more than you think." Silence stretched, but it wasn't hostile. It was the kind that 2 people share when both have lost something sacred but are still standing in the same room of memory. "Have you eaten?" she asked suddenly, absurdly. He smiled faintly on the other end. She could hear it. Yeah, leftovers. They weren't terrible. Good, she whispered. That's good. Before hanging up, she said, almost inaudibly, you deserve someone who didn't need to destroy herself to see your worth. And you, he said gently, deserved someone who reminded you you already had it. After the call ended, Olivia sat by the window, watching light pools shift across the opposite building. For the first time, she didn't feel like a fugitive. She felt like a witness to her own unraveling, her own rebuilding. Down the street, a violinist played something fragile but persistent, notes climbing against cold air. Imperfect, but alive. Olivia thought of Daniel's spreadsheet, the ledger. Maybe love wasn't a balance sheet to be closed, but a document always being revised, updated in margins, reevaluated with time. She took out her phone and typed a message she wouldn't send tonight. One day, when we're ready, let's have dinner. Not to fix anything, just to see if honesty can sit across the table without flinching. She saved it as a draft and finally slept, her breathing matching the faint rhythm of the city outside, steady, imperfect, but her own. Daniel had expected the days after Olivia's call to blur, but instead, everything grew sharp. The smallest details carried weight, the click of the light switch, the way the refrigerator hummed in her absence, the thin line of dust forming on her side of the dresser. Absence, he realized, had a language. It spoke through undone habits, through silence that once held conversation. He moved through the apartment like a curator cataloging remnants, her mug with the chip near the rim, the sweater she'd forgotten behind the door, the faint trace of her perfume clinging to the hallway where she used to pause and tie her hair before leaving. These were the exhibits of a life once shared, now fossilized. Every morning before work, he brewed 2 cups of coffee out of muscle memory, then poured one down the sink. The act was absurd, yet strangely grounding a daily ritual of acceptance. At the office, no one asked direct questions. Startups prided themselves on empathy until it became inconvenient. His manager, Jessica, called him into a meeting room one afternoon. "You okay, Dan? You've been quieter than usual." He nodded, forcing a professional half-smile. "Just recalibrating." "Take the time you need," she said gently, then hesitated. "I've been through it. Divorce is just a word until it's your furniture on the curb." He didn't correct her. They weren't divorced, not yet. The word hung in the air like a premonition. That night, Daniel met his therapist for the first time. The waiting room was minimalist succulence, pale walls, a scent of eucalyptus and restraint. Dr. Lena Cho, a calm woman in her 40s with kind eyes, gestured for him to sit. "So, Bamaoan," she began, "tell me what brings you here." "My wife cheated," he said, the sentence landing heavier than he expected, "and confessed, and left." Lena nodded, not with pity, but with comprehension. "And you?" "I'm still here," he said, "trying to understand if staying kind makes me naive." She tilted her head. "Do you believe kindness is weakness?" "No. I believe forgiveness can be mistaken for surrender." "And what do you want it to mean?" He thought for a long moment. "Evolution," he said, "not escape. I don't want to carry bitterness into the next version of myself." Lena smiled slightly. "That's rare. Most people come in wanting revenge or anesthesia." He returned the faint smile. "Maybe I'll get there later." When he left her office, the evening had turned metallic with cold. He stopped at a corner bookstore, one Olivia used to love, and bought a blank notebook. At home, he wrote on the first page, "Inventory of what remains." He began listing. Apartment lease, joint bank accounts, separate trust, fractured hope, unquantified. He paused, then wrote, "Kindness, still possible." The next morning, an email arrived from Olivia. The subject line read, "For the ledger." I canceled the gym membership we never used. Also, Nora says hi. She keeps telling me to write more. She's right. I'm starting therapy next week. I'll handle December's rent if you cover utilities. Fair? At the bottom, a postscript. I found your sketchbook from our first apartment. The one with the window study. It reminded me that you see beauty even in cracks. I hope you still do. He stared at the message for a long time before replying. Fair. I'm glad you're writing. And yes, I still see it. Then, almost impulsively, he added, if you ever want to talk about anything that isn't logistics, I'm here. Not as a husband, just as someone who remembers your real laugh. She didn't reply immediately, but that night, at 10:11 p.m., her name lit up his screen. That's the version of you I missed most. The one who didn't need to fix everything, just witnessed it. Something loosened in his chest, not reconciliation, but recognition. Days folded into weeks. December arrived with brittle light and the first snow brushing rooftops. Daniel found himself watching people in the park. Couples dragging Christmas trees, children collapsing into laughter as they built imperfect snowmen. It felt cinematic, unreal. He texted Olivia a photo of the snow settling on their old fire escape. First snow. You used to say it made the city forgive itself for a minute. She replied minutes later. Maybe it still does. Maybe we just forget how to look. That weekend, they met by quiet agreement, not at home, not at a hotel, but at a small cafe near the river. The place had fogged windows and bad coffee, but a kind of anonymity that suited them. When Olivia arrived, bundled in a gray coat, Daniel almost didn't recognize her, not because she'd changed, but because she looked lighter. Not absolved, just awake. You look real, he said. She smiled softly. That's new for me. They talked like old colleagues first about work, therapy, Nora's relentless optimism. Then the conversation turned. Do you ever think about what forgiveness actually is? Olivia asked. He nodded slowly. I think it's like debt restructuring. You can't erase it, but you can decide on new terms. She laughed. Only you would make forgiveness sound financial. It's how I cope, he said. Spreadsheets and metaphors. Her expression sobered. Daniel, I know we're not going back, but I don't want our story to end with only pain in it. He met her eyes, steady. It won't. It'll end with honesty. That's more valuable. She nodded, and for the first time since the night of the message, they shared silence without weight. When they parted outside, she hesitated. Do you think we'll ever be friends? Maybe, he said, if we learn to speak the language of absence without grief. She tilted her head, curious. And what does that sound like? Like this, he said, and smiled, small and true. She laughed, a real one this time. You always were better with endings. He watched her walk away, the snow softening the city into grayscale. For once, he didn't follow her silhouette with longing or resentment, just understanding. That night he opened his notebook again and wrote on a fresh page, Inventory update. Trust, regrowing, unevenly. Love, no longer possession. Regret, quieter. Future, uncharted but open. He closed the book and left it by the window, where the reflection of city lights shimmered across the cover like constellations rearranging themselves, proof that even shattered things could still form patterns worth reading. Winter settled like a verdict. The city's breath turned visible, the skyline a bruise against a pale sky. Daniel had begun to notice how sound carried differently in the cold, sharper, thinner, more honest. The apartment no longer felt haunted. It simply echoed. He was learning to live with the echo. He'd started therapy every Wednesday evening, then long walks afterward through Carroll Gardens where the trees stood skeletal but dignified. There was comfort in structure, even in emptiness. Olivia had moved fully into Nora's spare room and was rediscovering what solitude without punishment felt like. They hadn't spoken in 2 weeks, not out of resentment, but necessity. Distance was a language, too, one that translated grief into perspective. One morning, Daniel received a brown envelope in the mail. No return address, but her handwriting on the front. Inside was a letter, actual paper, folded neatly, the kind of thing neither of them had done since before smartphones. Daniel, I've been thinking about the night everything broke. How you didn't shout, didn't slam a door. You just said, "Start with the necklace." That's the line that won't leave me. You gave me the dignity of telling my own crime. I don't think I thanked you for that. I'm working on forgiving myself. It's not linear. Some mornings I wake up and almost believe I deserve peace. Some nights I still replay the click of your message and the silence before I confessed. I've realized that shame has a twin nostalgia. They both look backward and both lie. You once said kindness is the hardest thing to practice after betrayal. You were right. I'm learning that the truest kindness is precision to yourself, to others, to stop performing goodness and start living truth. I hope you're still designing beautiful things. Oh. He read it twice, then placed it in the notebook under inventory of what remains. For a long while, he just sat at the table, sunlight catching the rim of his coffee. He realized he no longer wanted to fix the past only to understand its architecture. That evening, during therapy, Lena asked, "Do you miss her? Or do you miss who you were with her?" He thought before answering. I think I miss who I believed I was capable of being loved without condition. But maybe that belief was always fragile. Lena nodded. Fragility isn't failure. It's awareness. He smiled faintly. You should put that on a mug. Later, he walked home through thin snow. The city glowed in its ordinary loneliness, shop fronts closing, taxis sighing past. At a crosswalk, he saw a reflection in the window of a boutique, himself, framed by light. Behind him, faint and ghost-like, another reflection Olivia's, though she wasn't there. For a moment, he stood suspended between memory and glass, realizing that healing looked less like forgetting and more like seeing clearly for the first time. Across town, Olivia was facing her own mirror. Nora had convinced her to attend a group therapy circle, Women Rewriting Narrative. The room was warm, the chairs arranged in an imperfect circle, coffee cups scattered like punctuation. Around her sat women with different stories, a nurse who'd left a controlling partner, an artist recovering from self-erasure, a teacher still married but emotionally gone. When it was Olivia's turn, she hesitated. The instinct to perform was still strong to craft the version of herself that sounded articulate, not broken. My name's Olivia, she began quietly. I thought infidelity would make me feel alive again. Instead, it just proved I'd stopped living honestly a long time before that. The room was silent, but not judgmental. One woman nodded, slow and understanding. Olivia felt something unclench. After the session, the facilitator, a soft-spoken woman named Claire, said, Sometimes we mistake destruction for liberation. The trick is to build differently next time. That night, Olivia wrote in her journal, I used to crave admiration because I confused it with love. Daniel admired me too, but without decoration, without worship. Maybe that's why it scared me. Real love demands to see your unedited self. She looked around Nora's apartment, stacks of books, the hum of the radiator, the faint smell of burnt toast. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. She finally allowed herself to cry without urgency, without performing regret for anyone else. A week later, Daniel texted her, Found your old scarf in the closet. Want me to drop it off? She replied, Keep it. It looks Better on you anyway. Then, after a pause, thank you for the letter space. Writing helps, even if it's just to you. Always welcome, he wrote back. We're better at letters than small talk. She sent one more message. Maybe that's because letters don't interrupt. They let you arrive when you're ready. That exchange, small as it was, marked the beginning of something neither had named, not reconciliation, not friendship, but a kind of correspondence between two survivors of the same wreckage. In the evenings that followed, they traded letters not daily, but when words found them. He wrote about designing a new app that helped people manage anxiety through structure. She wrote about taking pro bono cases for women in burnout litigation. Their letters became an archive of honesty, unhurried and unsentimental. One night, Daniel received an envelope containing a single photograph, the two of them from years ago, sitting on a Brooklyn rooftop, laughing at nothing. On the back, she'd written, "For the record, it was real, even if it didn't last." He pinned it to his wall above the desk, not as a shrine, but as evidence. Spring came hesitantly that year. The city thawed, puddles replacing snow, people relearning how to look up. Daniel met Olivia again by accident outside a bookstore near Union Square. She was holding a coffee, hair unbound, eyes tired but bright. "Hey," she said, smiling in surprise. "I was just thinking of you. They're selling first editions of Joan Didion inside. You'd approve." He laughed softly. "I probably would." They talked for 5 minutes, maybe 10, about books, not wounds, about new apartments, not old arguments. There was no trembling, no bitterness, just two people who had shared a life and were now, quietly, sharing peace. When they parted, she said, "Take care of yourself, Daniel." He nodded. "You too, Olivia." She walked away, her figure folding into the moving crowd. He didn't follow her this time. He simply stood under the streetlight, hands in pockets, the city's pulse aligning with his own. For the first time in months, he felt something close to relief, not because she was gone, but because she existed elsewhere, alive, honest, still writing. At home, he opened his notebook and wrote the final line under inventory of what remains. Not everything broken needs repair. Some things just need acknowledgement. Then he closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the room fill with the quiet sound of a city forgiving itself. One window, one heart, at a time. April came soft and indecisive, the kind of spring that couldn't commit to warmth. Trees half-bloomed, the air smelled faintly of wet pavement and lilac. Daniel had stopped counting how many weeks it had been since the night Olivia confessed. There was no calendar for recovery, only small metrics. He could now pass her old bakery without looking inside. Her name no longer stung when it flashed in his inbox. He had begun spending Sundays volunteering at a local youth design program, teenagers with sharp tongues and bright imaginations, kids who thought UX was short for unexpected. It was the first time in years that work felt unmeasured, free of corporate sheen. Teaching them made him remember the reason he'd started designing in the first place, to make complicated things gentler, to help people find clarity through clutter. One Sunday, during a class about visual balance, one of the students, a girl named Wren, asked, "Mr. Hart, do you think mistakes make things ugly?" Daniel looked at the poster she was designing off-center, but strangely alive. "No," he said quietly. "They make things human. Symmetry's overrated." That evening he walked home through the long light of early dusk, a coffee in one hand, his other brushing against the folded paper in his jacket, another letter from Olivia. They still wrote, though less often now. Their correspondence had shifted tone, less post-mortem, more present tense, like two parallel diaries occasionally touching edges. He hadn't opened this one yet. He waited until he was home, the apartment dusky with half-drawn blinds. He poured a glass of water, sat at the table, and unfolded the letter. Daniel, I saw a couple arguing outside the courthouse today, the kind of fight that's half performance, half plea. I didn't feel smug or sad or superior, just aware of how easy it is to mistake volume for truth. I used to think love lived in grand gestures. Now I think it's quieter, a kind of discipline. Maybe you knew that all along. Therapy's forcing me to say things out loud that I've only written before. Apparently, I'm still terrified of being ordinary. But I'm learning that ordinary isn't failure. It's where peace hides. I hope you found a bit of that. Oh, he smiled. A small, unguarded thing. Then he reached for his notebook and wrote back by hand as always. Olivia, peace is overrated, but stillness, that's different. I'm trying that now. I see the way people live. Not perfectly, not theatrically, just trying. You'd like these kids I teach. They're feral and brilliant. One of them told me mistakes are proof you were there. I think she's right. Be ordinary. It looks good on you. D. He mailed it the next morning, an act both tender and detached, like setting a paper boat on a river and knowing it doesn't need to come back. Across the city, Olivia was sitting on the courthouse steps, sipping coffee gone lukewarm. Her days had slowed into a rhythm: pro bono cases, therapy on Thursdays, long walks through streets she used to race past. She was still learning the difference between solitude and loneliness. The first felt like space, the second like punishment. That afternoon she received Daniel's letter. She read it 3 times, tracing his handwriting still neat, restrained, almost architectural. The line, "Be ordinary, it looks good, on you," made her laugh through tears. She took a cab to the East River, sat on a bench, and opened her notebook, the same one she'd started at Nora's. She began writing a list titled "Ordinary Things Worth Loving," the sound of toast popping, folding laundry while music plays, the pause before rain, doing something kind without being seen, letters that arrive late but right on time. The list steadied her. When Nora joined her later, carrying 2 paper cups of tea, she asked, "You've been quieter lately. Better quiet or worse quiet?" "Better," Olivia said, smiling. "It's the kind where I'm not rehearsing anymore." Nora nodded knowingly. That's how you know you're healing, when silence stops feeling like punishment. Olivia took a sip of tea, eyes on the water where sunlight shattered and stitched itself again. "Do you think people like us, the ones who broke things, get to start over?" Nora grinned. "Everyone starts over. Some just do it with more paperwork." They laughed, and for the first time, Olivia didn't feel like a ghost of her former self, just a person mid-chapter, mid-sentence, mid-life. Weeks later, Daniel attended a design conference upstate, his first trip alone since the separation. He stayed in a small lodge overlooking a lake still rimmed with ice. The sessions were dull, but the silence was fertile. One night, he sat by the water with his laptop, drafting a presentation about human emotion in design. Without meaning to, he began typing. The spaces between functions, the pauses, the hesitations are what makes systems human. The same is true for love. He stared at the sentence, realizing it wasn't about design at all. He closed the laptop and let the quiet hum of the lake swallow his thoughts. Back in the city, Olivia received a small package from him, a postcard of the lake, and a folded napkin sketch of ripples spreading outward. On the back, he'd written, "Sometimes distance doesn't mean loss. Sometimes it's proof that connection worked." She kept the card on her desk beside a framed photo of her parents and smiled every morning when she saw it. Months passed. They didn't reunite, didn't fall back into the old orbit. Instead, something gentler took root, an ongoing honesty that neither expected but both needed. They would still meet once in a while, for coffee or silence. No labels, no unfinished promises. One late summer afternoon, they sat at a park table, sunlight filtering through the leaves like soft confetti. Olivia said quietly, "Do you ever think we did the right thing, not staying?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I think we did the real thing. That's rarer." She nodded, her eyes shining not with regret but gratitude. "Then maybe that's enough." "Maybe it always was," he said. They sat until dusk, talking about everything except the past. When they finally stood, she touched his arm, light, respectful, present. "Take care of yourself." "Daniel," he smiled. "I already am." As she walked away, the city lights began to bloom behind her, one by one small testaments of endurance. Later that night, Daniel wrote in his notebook one last line. "Closure isn't a door slammed shut. It's a window opened quietly, letting new air in." And somewhere across the city, Olivia was writing too, not to him, but to herself, in ink steady for the first time in years. Some loves don't end. They evolve until they find peace. Autumn returned before either of them realized the year had turned its full circle. The air tasted faintly of metal and apples. Brooklyn's trees burned in slow-motion amber, rust, surrender. Daniel and Olivia had built new lives, not as a replacement for the old one, but as a quiet continuation. Somewhere between memory and forgiveness, they'd found rhythm again, different, unlinked, but steady. Daniel's mornings now began with running shoes instead of coffee for two. He jogged the promenade at dawn, the East River silvering in the weak light. There was a peace to repetition, a comfort in the body's certainty. He'd stopped checking his phone during those runs. The city itself was enough dialogue. His new apartment, smaller, uncluttered, filled with plants that actually survived, felt like a sketch completed in pencil, not ink. Temporary, but intentional. Work had changed too. He'd turned down a promotion to start his own small design collective for people. One shared goal: make technology feel human again. He named it The Ledger, half joke, half homage. His team didn't know the story behind the name. He never told them. But every time he typed the word, he thought of the night the first message left his phone and everything began. Olivia's life unfolded on a quieter frequency. She'd moved out of Nora's, renting a modest apartment near Prospect Park. The walls were pale blue, the kind she'd once mocked as too soft. Now, she loved them. They didn't demand to impress anyone. She'd left the high-rise firm months ago and joined a legal aid foundation, low pay, heavy caseload, endless humanity. But every time she walked out of court, tired yet clean of pretense, she felt a kind of redemption that the glass towers of Manhattan had never given her. She'd started cooking again. Simple meals: soup, bread, tea. Her therapist called it the ceremony of sustenance, a way to rebuild trust with her own body, to remind herself that care didn't have to be performative. At night, she read books she'd once pretended to like, and finally learned which ones she truly did. They didn't see each other often now. Our letters had dwindled into occasional texts, and even those came at irregular intervals. But the connection had matured into something like weather, felt more than spoken, subtle, reliable in its quietness. One October afternoon, Daniel received an invitation in the mail, a handwritten envelope addressed in Olivia's looping script. Inside was a card: Community Legal Aid Annual Fundraiser Friday, Octa 12. Art auction. If you're free, come. No pressure. Just, it would be nice. He smiled at the simplicity of it. No apologies, no subtext, just an ordinary ask. That Friday, he arrived at the small gallery in Dumbo, where exposed brick met framed testimonies from clients' portraits of resilience, not pity. Olivia stood near the entrance in a black dress, simple, elegant, unperformed. When she saw him, something unreadable flickered across her face. Surprise, warmth, a flicker of gratitude that he'd come without needing context. "Daniel," she said, a little breathless, "you came." "Of course," he said, and meant it. The room hummed with conversation, the soft clink of glasses. On one wall hung a series of photographs titled "The Cost of Silence." Each image showed an object left behind an unpaid bill, a note, a door ajar. He stood before them for a long time until Olivia joined him. "They're beautiful," he said quietly, "and painful." "They're by one of my clients," she said, "a woman who left everything after 20 years and started photographing what people abandon when they leave. She calls them evidence of survival." He nodded. "Evidence," he repeated. "That's the word, isn't it? For everything we've been through." For a moment they stood shoulder to shoulder, not as husband and wife, not as past and present, just as two witnesses who'd lived through the same storm. When the auction began, Olivia excused herself to speak, and Daniel watched from the crowd. Her voice was steadier now, less performance, more presence. She talked about access to justice, about starting over, about how even mistakes deserved representation. He realized, not without pride, that she had grown into a version of herself that didn't need his forgiveness to stand tall. After the event, they stepped outside together. The city glowed beneath them, bridges stretched like promises. "You did well tonight," Daniel said. Olivia smiled. "I didn't faint. That's an improvement." He laughed, soft and genuine. "You've come a long way." "So have you," she said, studying him. "You look lighter." "I think that's just time doing its job." She hesitated. "Do you ever miss us?" He looked at her, not evasively, but carefully. "Sometimes, but not the way you think. I miss the simplicity of believing things last forever, but I don't want that back. What we had taught me how to love better, even when it ends." She exhaled slowly. "That's kinder than I deserve." "Maybe," he said, "but it's true." A silence unfolded, the kind that used to suffocate them, now strangely peaceful. "I'm seeing someone," she said finally, her voice small but steady. "It's new, slow. I wanted you to hear it from me." He nodded, the ache brief but honest. "I'm glad you told me. I really am." She searched. His face, perhaps expecting jealousy, but found only understanding. "And you?" she asked. "Anyone new?" He smiled faintly. "Not yet. I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to fix things." "Maybe that's the best relationship you'll ever have," she said. He laughed softly. "Maybe." They walked together to the corner where their paths would split, her train downtown, his bus across the bridge. There was no need for ceremony this time. "I'll see you around," she said, meaning it in the most ordinary human way. "Yeah," he said, "around." They hugged briefly, no tension, no hidden pulse, just gratitude. Then she turned away, her figure folding into the slow tide of pedestrians. Daniel stood for a moment watching the light reflect off the wet street. It struck him that life wasn't about closure or erasure, it was about endurance, the grace to let things remain unfinished without bitterness. He walked to the river's edge. The water was dark but alive, full of small movements the eye could barely track. He took out his notebook, creased, nearly full, and wrote his final entry. "She's okay. I'm okay. That's enough. Some stories end quietly, so they can keep existing elsewhere." He tore the page carefully, folded it once, and let the wind take it, the paper floating above the river before dissolving into night. For a moment, he thought of the message that had started it all, the single line that broke and remade two lives. And then, with the calm of a man who no longer needed answers, he whispered to the water, "Thank you for confessing." The city answered in its own way, horns distant, lights flickering, 1,000 small forevers pulsing in the dark.